When an exhausted homeless woman gathered her courage to ask a young man for food outside a fancy Manhattan restaurant, she had no idea he was Barron Trump, or that their chance encounter would change not just her life, but the lives of teachers across America. Here's the remarkable true story of how one desperate request led to an extraordinary chain of kindness. Sarah Jones pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as the cold November wind whistled between the tall buildings of Manhattan. Her stomach growled so loudly that a businesswoman walking past gave her a startled look before hurrying away in her clicking heels. 2 days. It had been 2 days since her last real meal. Half a sandwich from a kind deli owner who sometimes helped her out. Sarah touched the smooth stone in her pocket, the one thing she had kept from her classroom. One of her third-grade students had given it to her, saying it was lucky. Some luck it had brought her. Just 8 months ago, she had stood in front of her classroom at PS 183, teaching her students about multiplication and division. She could still see their eager faces, especially little Maria, who always sat in the front row with her purple butterfly pencil case. Sarah had been teaching for 15 years when everything fell apart. The cold wind made her eyes water as she remembered that terrible day. The doctors had found something in her routine checkup. Tests, so many tests, and then surgery. She had good insurance, or so she thought. But then the bills started coming. First thousands, then tens of thousands of dollars. The insurance company found a loophole, a pre-existing condition, they said. They wouldn't pay. Sarah walked past a fancy shop window filled with sparkly Christmas decorations. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized anymore. Her once neat brown hair hung limp and unwashed around her face. The coat she wore had come from a church donation bin, and her shoes had holes in them that let in the freezing wind. "Keep moving," a security guard said, stepping out of the shop doorway. "No loitering." Sarah nodded and shuffled along. She wasn't always sure where she was going anymore, but she knew she had to keep moving. The shelters were usually full this time of year, and some of them scared her. Last week, someone had stolen her backpack while she slept in one. Now she kept everything important in her pockets. As she walked, memories flooded back like a movie she couldn't turn off. The day she had to sell her car. The final notice on her apartment door. Her principal's sad face when she had to resign because she couldn't make it to work anymore. Each memory stung like the cold wind on her face. A delicious smell wafted from a restaurant ahead. Mario's, one of those fancy Italian places where a plate of pasta probably cost more than she used to make in a day of teaching. Through the windows, she could see people laughing and eating, their faces warm in the golden light. Her stomach cramped painfully. Sarah reached into her pocket and touched the lucky stone again, feeling its smooth surface. Next to it was a folded piece of paper, a photo of her class from last year. She had laminated it before everything happened, which was why it had survived so long on the streets. Sometimes at night, when things felt darkest, she would look at those smiling faces and remember who she used to be. The sky was getting darker, and the temperature was dropping. Sarah knew she needed to find somewhere to sleep soon, but the hunger made it hard to think. She had tried the usual spots, behind the library, near the heating vents of the big office buildings, but more and more people were competing for those spaces as winter approached. A group of tourists passed by, talking excitedly about their plans for dinner. Sarah tried not to listen, tried not to think about food, but it was impossible. She remembered the last parent-teacher conference night at her school, when everyone had brought dishes to share. Mrs. Rodriguez's homemade empanadas, Mr. Chen's dumplings, the chocolate chip cookies that Tommy's dad always baked. Her classroom had smelled amazing that night, The sound of a car door slamming nearby snapped Sarah back to reality. She looked up to see a sleek black SUV parked in front of Mario's. A tall teenage boy in an expensive wool coat stepped out, followed by men in dark suits who scanned the street with alert eyes. Something about the boy caught Sarah's attention. He had a kind face, young but somehow older than his years. He smiled and thanked his driver, which surprised her. Not all rich people did that. Sarah's legs felt weak from hunger and cold. She knew she shouldn't, knew it was probably useless, but something about that boy's smile gave her courage she hadn't felt in months. Before she could talk herself out of it, she took a step toward Mario's entrance. The security men noticed her immediately, their hands moving to their earpieces. Sarah almost turned back then, almost disappeared into the shadows like she had learned to do. But her stomach cramped again, and she thought of her students, how she had always taught them to be brave, to ask for help when they needed it. The boy was almost at the restaurant door now. In a moment, he would disappear inside to join the warm, well-fed people in their cozy bubble. Sarah had a split second to decide. Ask for help and risk humiliation, or stay hungry and cold in the growing darkness. She took another step forward, her heart pounding. The lucky stone seemed to grow warmer in her pocket, almost like it was encouraging her. The security men were watching her every move. The boy reached for the door handle. It was now or never. Little Maria's voice echoed in. Her head, "Ms. Jones, you always tell us to be brave. That's why I gave you my lucky stone." Sarah opened her mouth to speak. "Wait," Sarah called out softly, her voice shaking. "Please." The boy paused with his hand on the door handle. When he turned around, the streetlights caught his face clearly for the first time. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as recognition slowly dawned on her. She had seen that face before, on television, in magazines at the grocery store back when she could still afford to shop there. He was taller in person than she had expected, but there was no mistaking those features, that particular way of carrying himself. Barron Trump. Sarah's mouth went dry. Of all the people she could have approached, she had chosen the former president's son. Her courage began to crumble like old bread. The security men were already moving toward her, their faces stern and professional. "Ma'am, please step back," one of them said firmly. Sarah's feet felt frozen to the sidewalk. She watched as one guard spoke quietly into his wrist microphone, probably calling for backup. Another had positioned himself between her and the young man. Through the gap between their shoulders, she could see Barron Trump watching her with curious eyes. A memory flashed through her mind. Her class discussing current events, the children excited to share what they knew about the president's family. "Ms. Jones, did you know the president's son is really tall?" Tommy had announced proudly. "Just like me." The class had laughed, because Tommy was the shortest boy in 3rd grade. The memory gave her strength. These men might see a shabby homeless woman, but she had once been Ms. Jones, the teacher who made multiplication tables fun and helped scared children feel brave. She straightened her shoulders slightly, trying to remember that feeling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice clearer now. "I don't mean any harm, I just—" Her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, finishing her sentence for her. More security personnel appeared from somewhere, their black SUVs pulling up silently to the curb. Sarah knew she should walk away. This had been a mistake. She was nobody now, just another hungry face on the streets of New York. But as she started to turn away, she heard a voice. Younger than she expected, but with a quiet authority that made everyone pause. "Wait a moment, please." It was Barron Trump speaking. The security team exchanged glances but held their positions. Sarah turned back slowly, clutching her lucky stone so hard it hurt her palm. The young man was studying her face carefully. There was something in his expression that reminded her of Maria when she was trying to solve a particularly difficult math problem. Thoughtful, focused, like he was putting pieces together in his mind. "You're shivering," he observed quietly. Sarah hadn't even noticed, but he was right. The wind had picked up, cutting through her thin jacket like it wasn't even there. One of the security men shifted uncomfortably, and she saw his hand move toward his earpiece again. She should say something. Thank him for stopping. Ask for help. Anything. But the words stuck in her throat like day-old bread. When was the last time someone of importance had really looked at her, had seen her as a person rather than a problem to avoid? The restaurant door opened behind them, releasing a burst of warm air that carried the smell of garlic bread and tomato sauce. Sarah's stomach cramped so hard she almost doubled over. Through the door, she could see people dining at tables with white tablecloths, their plates piled with steaming food. Barron Trump glanced over his shoulder at the restaurant, then back at Sarah. His face had changed somehow, like he had come to a decision. He took a small step forward, causing his security team to tense. "Sir," one of them warned, but Barron raised his hand slightly. "It's all right, James," he said. Then, to Sarah's complete surprise, he asked, "What's your name?" The question was so normal, so human, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. When was the last time someone had asked her name? Not the shelter workers who just wanted to put a label on a form. Not the police who sometimes moved her along from doorways. Not the busy people who passed her every day without seeing her. She opened her mouth to answer, and that's when she saw the news van turning the corner. Sarah watched the white van with Channel 7 News painted on its side roll slowly toward them. Her first instinct was to disappear. It was what she'd gotten good at over these past months. But before she could step back into the shadows, she heard Barron Trump say something that surprised her. "Inside. Please." His voice was quiet but firm. He gestured toward Mario's restaurant door, and his security team immediately moved to create a path. Sarah stood frozen, unsure if he was talking to her. "Ms.?" he prompted gently. "Jones," she whispered. "Sarah Jones." "Ms. Jones, would you please come inside? It's warmer, and we can talk without an audience." The news van was getting closer. Sarah could see the camera operator in the passenger seat, already reaching for their equipment. The security team moved with practiced smoothness, one opening the restaurant door while others positioned themselves to block the view from the street. Inside Mario's, the warmth hit Sarah like a wave. The smell of food was even stronger here, making her dizzy. Rich people looked up from their plates, their faces showing surprise and disapproval at her shabby appearance. A waiter started hurrying over, probably to ask her to leave, but stopped short when he recognized Barron. "Mr. Trump," the waiter said, his manner changing instantly. "Your usual table?" "The private room, please, Tony," Barron replied. "And we'll need an extra place setting." Sarah felt like she was in a dream. The thick carpet under her worn shoes, the soft lighting, the quiet murmur of expensive conversations. It all seemed unreal after so many months on the streets. She clutched her lucky stone tighter, its familiar shape the only thing that felt real. The security team guided them smoothly through the restaurant to a small room in the back. It had just one table, set for 4, with a window overlooking a tiny garden. 2 guards positioned themselves outside the door while one stayed inside, standing discreetly in the corner. "Please, sit," Barron said, pulling out a chair for her. The gesture was so polite, so normal, that Sarah felt tears threatening again. When was the last time someone had pulled out a chair for her? As she sat down, she noticed her reflection in the window. Unwashed hair, hollow cheeks, clothes that had once been nice, but were now dirty and worn. She didn't belong here. Any moment now, someone would realize this and make her leave. "Would you like some water?" Barron asked, already pouring from a crystal pitcher. "And bread? Tony always brings extra bread." As if on cue, the waiter appeared, with a basket of steaming garlic bread. The smell made Sarah's stomach growl so loudly that she wanted to sink through the floor in embarrassment, but Barron just smiled and pushed the basket toward her. "Please, eat," he said. "Take your time. We can talk when you're ready." Sarah's hands shook as she reached for a piece of bread. She tried to eat slowly, to be polite, but it was so hard. When the food was right there, warm and real and smelling like heaven, Barron busied himself with the menu, pretending not to notice as she ate 3 pieces in quick succession. Through the window, she could see the news van had parked across the street. The camera operator was filming the front of the restaurant, but the security team had done their job well. There was nothing to see. "Ms. Jones," Barron said after she had slowed down her eating. "You were a teacher?" Sarah looked up, surprised. "How did you—" "The way you carry yourself," he said. "And there's a laminated paper in your pocket. I caught a glimpse. Looks like a class photo. Teachers are the ones who laminate things." She touched the photo through her jacket, amazed that he had noticed such a detail. "3rd grade," she said softly, "at PS 183. Until what?" The bread turned to ash in her mouth as she remembered. But looking at this young man's patient face, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, a glimmer of hope. Taking a deep breath, she told him everything. The medical bills, the insurance company's denial, the slow slide from struggling to homeless. When she finished, Barron was quiet for a long moment. Through the window, camera lights flashed as reporters gathered outside. But in here, in this warm room that smelled of garlic and hope, time seemed to stand still. Finally, Barron reached for his phone. "I'd like to make a call," he said. "But first, Miss Jones, may I ask you something?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. "Do you still want to teach?" The question hit her like a thunderbolt. Want to teach? She thought of Maria's smile when she finally understood fractions, of Tommy's proud grin when he grew 2 inches and could reach the top of the blackboard, of the lucky stone still warm in her pocket. "More than anything," she whispered. Barron nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. He lifted his phone, but before he could dial, the door burst open. "Sir, we need to move." "Now!" The security guard who burst in was younger than the others, his face flushed with urgency. "The press is gathering outside. Someone tipped them off about—" He glanced at Sarah, then back to Barron. "About the situation." Sarah's heart sank. Of course this would end now. She'd been foolish to think anything else could happen. She started to stand, ready to slip away and become invisible again. "Sit down, Ms. Jones," Barron said quietly. "Please." Then to the guard, "Thank you, Mike. But we're not finished here. Sir, your father's office is calling. They want to know how to handle the press." A slight frown crossed Barron's face. "Tell them I'll handle it myself." He turned back to Sarah. "I apologize for the interruption. Now, about teaching." The young guard shifted uncomfortably, but didn't leave. Outside the window, Sarah could see more news vans arriving. The garden was now filled with camera flashes like lightning bugs on a summer evening. It reminded her of the time she'd taken her class on a night field trip to study insects. "Ms. Jones," Barron continued, ignoring the chaos outside, "you mentioned PS 183. Did you know Mrs. Chen?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Eleanor Chen?" "Yes, she was our math specialist. She helped me develop better ways to teach multiplication. Tables." Sarah smiled at the memory. She always said that every child could learn math if we just found the right way to teach them. Barron's eyes lit up. "She said the exact same thing to me." "To you?" Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face. "I was struggling with algebra when I first started at my new school," Barron explained. "Mrs. Chen was hired as a special tutor. She changed everything for me, made me believe I could actually do it." He paused, looking thoughtful. "Do you know what happened to her?" Sarah's throat tightened. "She retired last year. Her husband got sick, and the medical bills..." She stopped, the parallel to her own story suddenly clear. "Yes," Barron said softly. "The medical bills." He reached for his phone again, but this time when the young guard started to protest, Barron held up his hand. "Mike, please, give us 5 minutes. That's all I need." The guard reluctantly stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Through the window, Sarah could now see at least 5 news vans. People with cameras were setting up equipment, their lights creating a circle of artificial day in the growing darkness. "Ms. Jones," Barron said, his voice serious, "I've been working on something. A project that started because of Mrs. Chen. When I found out what happened to her..." He took a deep breath. "Let's just say it made me realize some things need to change." Sarah watched as he pulled up something on his phone. Outside, she could hear the muffled voices of reporters doing their stand-ups, probably speculating about why the former president's son was in a private room with a homeless woman. "Here," he said, turning the phone so she could see. "This is, what we've been building." On the screen was a website. At the top it read, "Second Chances Education Initiative." Below were photos of people, teachers, Sarah realized, and their stories. Stories that sounded painfully familiar. Medical bills, family emergencies, lost jobs, and then... "Keep scrolling," Barron encouraged. Sarah's finger trembled as she swiped up. After each story of hardship came a story of recovery. Teachers back, in classrooms, lives rebuilt, hope restored. "Mrs. Chen helped me design it," Barron said quietly. "She's our program director now. We help teachers who've fallen on hard times get back into the classroom. Full medical coverage, housing assistance, everything they need to start over." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. On the screen, she saw Mrs. Chen's familiar smile in a photo, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in algebra equations. "But why?" she whispered. "Why teachers?" "Because good teachers change lives," Barron said simply. "Mrs. Chen changed mine. I'm sure you changed many lives too, Ms. Jones. And I think you still have more lives to change." Outside, the cameras were still flashing. The guard knocked on the door again, more urgently this time. "So," Barron said, "I have a question for you, Ms. Jones. Would you like to be our next success story?" Sarah's hand found the lucky stone in her pocket. It felt warmer than ever, almost like it was vibrating with possibility. But doubt crept in, dark and familiar. "But the press..." She gestured to the window. "Won't this look bad for you? Helping someone like me?" Barron's face broke into a genuine smile. "Actually, Ms. Jones, I'm counting on it. Sometimes the best way to make change is to let everyone see it happening." He stood up and straightened his coat. "Now, Should we go tell them what real change looks like? Sarah looked down at her shabby clothes, her worn shoes. Like this? Exactly like this, Barron said firmly. Because tomorrow, you'll look different. But today is the important part. Today is where the story begins. He held out his hand to her, and Sarah realized with a start that no one had offered to help her up in months. As she took his hand, the door opened again. But this time, instead of a nervous guard, Mrs. Chen walked in. Sarah? Mrs. Chen's voice was exactly as Sarah remembered it. Warm and kind, with just a hint of her Shanghai childhood in certain words. Oh, Sarah. Sarah's legs wobbled, and she gripped Barron's hand tighter to stay standing. Mrs. Chen looked different from her teaching days. Her black hair now had elegant streaks of silver, and she wore a beautiful blue suit instead of her usual casual teacher clothes. But her eyes were the same, bright and sharp behind her glasses. I came as soon as Barron called, Mrs. Chen said, moving forward to take Sarah's other hand. Though I had a feeling it might be you when he described a homeless teacher from PS 183. You knew? Sarah's voice cracked. You knew I've been looking for you, Mrs. Chen said softly. We all have. When you disappeared, we were so worried. The other teachers, your students, even little Maria asks about you every time I see her family at the grocery store. At the mention of Maria's name, Sarah's free hand went to the lucky stone in her pocket. Mrs. Chen noticed the movement and smiled. She told me she gave you that stone, she said. She was so proud that her lucky stone might help her favorite teacher. The cameras outside were still flashing, their lights making patterns on the restaurant's back wall. Sarah could hear the crowd of reporters growing larger, their voices a steady hum of excitement through the window. Sarah, Barron said gently, we need to make a decision. The press is waiting, and they're going to tell this story one way or another. The question is, do we tell it our way? Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. You always told your students to be brave, remember? To face challenges head-on? Sarah looked between them. This unlikely pair who had somehow found her at her lowest moment. The former president's son and her old teaching colleague, both offering her a chance she never thought she'd get again. What? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What would I have to do? Just tell your story, Barron said. Let people understand how someone who dedicates their life to teaching children can end up on the streets because of one medical emergency. Help us show why this program is so important. And then, Mrs. Chen added, her eyes twinkling, you'll let us help you get back where you belong. In a classroom, changing lives. Sarah thought of her students, not just the ones from her last class, but all of them over the years. How many times had she told them that being brave didn't mean not being scared? It meant doing what needed to be done even when you were scared. Through the window, she could see the garden was now packed with reporters. Their cameras were trained on the restaurant, waiting. In a few minutes, they would capture her at her worst moment. Homeless, hungry, desperate. But they would also capture what happened next. Will it? Sarah hesitated. Will it help other teachers? Other people like me? Barron nodded. That's the whole point. Your story, Mrs. Chen's story. They show why this matters. Why we can't let dedicated teachers end up on the street because of medical bills or family emergencies. And Mrs. Chen said with a small smile, I happen to know PS 183 is looking for a third-grade teacher for next semester. Once you're back on your feet, of course. Sarah's heart leaped. Her old school, her old grade level. Could it really be possible? The young security guard, Mike, poked his head in again. "Sir, they're asking for a statement, and your father's office is calling again." Barron looked at Sarah. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "We can find another way if you're not ready for this. The help is yours either way." Sarah touched the lucky stone one last time. Then she straightened her shoulders, the way she used to do before facing a new class on the first day of school. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's show them what real change looks like," Mrs. Chen beamed. Barron smiled and nodded to Mike. "Tell them we're coming out, all of us." As they moved toward the door, Sarah realized she was still holding both their hands, Barron's and Mrs. Chen's, like anchors, keeping her steady as she prepared to face the lights, the cameras, and the chance to start over. "Ready?" Barron asked. Sarah thought of Maria's words again. "You always tell us to be brave." "Ready," she said, and they stepped forward together. The moment they stepped out of Mario's camera, flashes exploded like fireworks. Sarah squinted against the bright lights, grateful for the steady support of Barron and Mrs. Chen on either side of her. The security team formed a protective semicircle around them, but didn't block the cameras completely, which, Sarah realized, was probably intentional. "Mr. Trump, why are you helping this homeless woman? Is this a publicity stunt?" "Mrs. Chen, what's your involvement?" The reporters' questions came rapid fire, their microphones thrust forward like spears. Sarah felt her courage wavering, but then she remembered all the times she'd stood in front of a new class, nervous but determined. This was just another kind of teaching moment. Barron stepped slightly forward, his voice clear and confident. "Today, I want to tell you about two teachers who changed my life. One of them is standing here with me, Mrs. Eleanor Chen, who taught me that everyone can learn if given the right chance." He smiled at Mrs. Chen, then continued. "The other was my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who showed me that kindness is just as important as knowledge." The reporters went quiet, pencils poised over notepads, cameras rolling steadily now instead of flashing. When I learned that Mrs. Chen almost lost everything due to medical bills, it made me think about Mrs. Patterson and about all the other teachers who shape our lives. That's why we created the Second Chances Education Initiative. He gestured to Sarah. "And today, I'd like you to meet our newest participant, Ms. Sarah Jones." Sarah felt Mrs. Chen squeeze her hand encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she found her teacher voice, the one that could quiet a rowdy classroom with just a few words. "My name is Sarah Jones," she said, and was surprised by how steady she sounded. "Until 8 months ago, I taught third grade at PS 183. I loved my students. I loved teaching them about multiplication tables and helping them discover poetry, and watching their faces light up when they finally understood something difficult." She paused, seeing the reporters lean forward, slightly. Some were nodding, perhaps remembering their own favorite teachers. "Then I got sick. The insurance company denied my claim. I lost everything, my job, my apartment, my dignity. But today," she touched the lucky stone in her pocket. "Today, I learned that sometimes the most important lesson we can teach our students is that it's okay to ask for help." The questions started again, but differently now. "Ms. Jones, will you be returning to teaching? How many teachers has this program helped? Mr. Trump, what inspired you to focus on educators?" Barron answered some questions while directing others to Mrs. Chen, who explained the program's details with her characteristic clarity. Sarah noticed how smoothly they worked together, like a well-practiced teaching team. As Mrs. Chen described, The program's success stories, Sarah saw hope in the faces of the reporters. This wasn't just another celebrity photo op. This was something real. "Ms. Jones," one reporter called out, "what would you say to other teachers who might be struggling right now?" Sarah thought about her answer carefully. "I would tell them what I've always told my students. It's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many times you get back up. And," she smiled at Barron and Mrs. Chen, "it's about having people who help you stand when you can't do it alone." A young reporter in the back raised her hand, a gesture that made Sarah's teacher heart warm. "Mr. Trump, will this program be expanding to other cities?" "Actually," Barron said, "that's what I wanted to announce today. Thanks to our initial success and some generous donors who believe in our mission, we're expanding the Second Chances initiative to 5 more cities by the end of the year." This announcement set off another round of camera flashes and questions. As the reporters scribbled in their notebooks, Sarah felt Mrs. Chen lean close to her ear. "Look across the street," she whispered. Sarah glanced past the crowd of reporters. There, standing on the sidewalk in front of Mario's, was a small group of people. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized them. Teachers from PS 183, some of her former students, and their parents. Maria was there, jumping up and down and waving wildly. Even Tommy, who wasn't so short anymore, stood with his dad, who was holding what looked suspiciously like a box of his famous chocolate chip cookies. "They came as soon as they heard," Mrs. Chen explained softly. "The whole school has been looking for you, Sarah. You were never alone. You just couldn't see us searching." Tears blurred Sarah's vision, but these were different from the tears of despair she'd cried so often in recent months. These were tears of hope, of belonging, of coming home. Barron was still talking to the reporters about the program's expansion, but he paused when he noticed Sarah's tears. Without missing a beat, he smiled and said, "I think what we're seeing right now is exactly what this program is about. It's about community. It's about saying that no good teacher should ever have to stand alone." As if on cue, Maria broke away from the group across the street and darted through the crowd of reporters. Before anyone could stop her, she had thrown her arms around Sarah's waist. "I knew it would work," she exclaimed. "I knew the lucky stone would help you." The reporters' cameras went wild, capturing the moment. But Sarah barely noticed the flashes anymore. She was too busy hugging Maria back, feeling the lucky stone warm in her pocket, and realizing that this was more than just a meal or a program or even a second chance. This was a reminder of what she'd always taught her students, that sometimes the biggest lessons come from the hardest times, and that hope can find you even when you think you're invisible. Barron and Mrs. Chen stepped back slightly, letting Sarah have her moment with Maria. But Sarah reached out and grabbed their hands, again pulling them into the hug, because she understood now. This wasn't just her story anymore. This was about all of them, standing together, showing the world what real change looks like. Later that evening, after the reporters had filed their stories and the crowd had dispersed, Sarah found herself sitting in a warm office at the Second Chances Initiative headquarters. The space looked more like a classroom than an office, with motivational posters on the walls and a small whiteboard covered in colorful markers. It felt like home. "Tea?" Mrs. Chen asked, setting down a steaming cup. "It's the same jasmine tea I used to keep in my classroom. Remember?" Sarah smiled, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "You used to say it helped you think better." "It does," Mrs. Chen said, settling into a chair. Barron sat nearby, his tall frame somehow fitting comfortably in one of the student-sized chairs they kept in the office. "And we have some thinking to do. But first," Barron said, "there's something you should know, Ms. Jones. Something about why you're really here. Sarah looked between them, confused. I thought I was here because of coincidence. Because I happened to ask you for help outside. Mario's. There's more to it than that, Mrs. Chen said softly. Show her, Barron. Barron pulled out his phone and pulled up a photo. He handed it to Sarah, who nearly dropped it when she saw the image. It was a much younger Mrs. Chen, standing in front of a classroom. Next to her was another teacher, younger and less gray, but Sarah would have recognized her anywhere. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah whispered. Your third-grade teacher? Look at the student teachers in the back of the photo, Mrs. Chen prompted. Sarah's hands trembled as she zoomed in. There, standing in the back row, was a younger version of herself. She remembered that day, her first day of student teaching. Terrified and excited, wanting so badly to make a difference. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just my teacher, Barron explained. She was your mentor during your student teaching year. And Mrs. Chen wasn't just my tutor. She was your colleague and friend. When I described my third-grade teacher to Mrs. Chen 6 months ago, she made the connection. That's why we've been looking for you, Mrs. Chen added. When we heard what happened, that you'd lost everything, well, we knew we had to find you, but you'd disappeared so completely. Sarah's mind was spinning. But the program? The Second Chances initiative? Was already in the works, Barron said. But learning about you, about how Mrs. Patterson's student, teacher had ended up homeless because of medical bills. It gave us the push we needed to launch sooner, to make it bigger. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's voice caught. How is she? A shadow crossed Barron's face. She passed away last year. Cancer. But before she died, she made me promise to do something about the broken system that was hurting so many teachers. She said teachers spend their lives lifting others up. It was time someone lifted them up in return. Sarah remembered Mrs. Patterson's laugh, her way of making every student feel special. How she'd taught Sarah to do the same thing. She would have loved this program. She inspired it, Barron said, just like she inspired you to become a teacher, and like you've inspired your students. It's a chain of kindness, stretching through generations. Mrs. Chen reached over and touched Sarah's hand. When Maria gave you that lucky stone, she said it was because you taught her about being brave. Do you know where she learned about giving lucky stones? Sarah shook her head. From me, Mrs. Chen smiled. And I learned it from Mrs. Patterson. She used to give them to students who were struggling, tell them that luck wasn't magic. It was about being brave enough to keep trying. Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as she pulled out the stone. In the warm office light, she could see it clearly for the first time in months. It was smooth and gray, with a single stripe of white running through it like a smile. I had no idea, she whispered. All this time. That's the thing about teaching, Barron said. You never really know how far your influence reaches. Mrs. Patterson taught me about kindness, and she taught you about teaching. You taught Maria about bravery, and she taught me about lucky stones. Mrs. Chen connected all the pieces. And now, Mrs. Chen added, you'll teach again. Show other teachers that second chances are real. The circle continues. Sarah looked around. The office. At the motivational posters that reminded her of Mrs. Patterson's classroom. At the whiteboard that could have been in any teacher's room. At these two people who had been connected to her all along without her knowing it. Mrs. Patterson used to say that teaching was like planting seeds, she remembered. You might not be there to see them all bloom, but you had to trust that they would. She was right, Barron smiled. Look how her seeds have grown. Into this. program, into all the teachers we've helped, into all the students they'll teach, into hope," Mrs. Chen added. Sarah held up the lucky stone, watching it catch the light. "Into bravery," she said softly. And in that moment, sitting in an office that felt like a classroom, holding a stone that had passed through generations of teachers, Sarah understood the true meaning of Mrs. Patterson's favorite saying: teaching isn't just about lessons in books. It's about the lessons that live in hearts. The seeds she had planted were blooming after all. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of room 302 at PS 183, her hand resting on the doorknob. Through the window, she could see her new students settling into their desks, their excited chatter muffled by the glass. 3rd grade, just like before. But everything was different now. She wore a new blue dress, chosen with Mrs. Chen's help. Her hair was neatly styled, and her shoes were comfortable and sturdy. Perfect for a teacher who spent hours on her feet. In her pocket, she carried 2 things: the original lucky stone from Maria and a small box containing 30 new stones, 1 for each of her students. Ready? Sarah turned to find Barron standing in the hallway, looking slightly out of place among the classroom decorations and children's artwork. But his smile was warm and genuine. "Shouldn't you be at college?" she asked, smoothing her dress nervously. "And miss your first day back? No way." He gestured to the window. "Besides, look who else came." Sarah peeked in again and gasped. Sitting in the back of the classroom was Mrs. Chen, and next to her was Maria, who had begged to be there for her former teacher's return. Even Tommy had stopped by before heading to his middle school classes, leaving a box of his dad's chocolate chip cookies on her desk. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind. The Second Chances initiative had provided everything they promised: temporary housing, medical care, and help getting her teaching credentials reinstated. But more than that, they'd given her a purpose again. Sarah had already spoken at 3 teacher conferences, sharing her story and helping identify other educators in need. The program was expanding faster than anyone had expected, with schools across the country reaching out to participate. "The morning news did a follow-up story about you," Barron said quietly. "It's inspired 6 more states to look at teacher health care reform. Mrs. Patterson would have loved that." Sarah touched the lucky stone in her pocket. "She always said, 1 person could change the world." "1 teacher," Barron corrected with a smile. "She specifically said 1 teacher could change the world." The school bell rang, making them both jump. Inside the classroom, the students scrambled to their seats, their faces turned expectantly toward the door. It was time. "Ms. Jones?" Barron said as she reached for the doorknob again. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to ask for help that day. For showing others they can do the same." Sarah thought about that moment outside Mario's, how close she'd come to walking away. "Thank you for being kind enough to listen." She opened the door and walked into her classroom. The smell of chalk dust and pencil shavings brought happy tears to her eyes. Mrs. Chen beamed from the back of the room, and Maria bounced excitedly in her chair. "Good morning, class," Sarah said, her teacher voice strong and clear. "My name is Ms. Jones, and I have a story to tell you about bravery, kindness, and lucky stones." As she reached into her pocket for the box of stones, she saw Barron slip quietly away from the door. But she knew he wasn't really leaving. He was just moving on to help the next teacher, to continue the chain of kindness that Mrs. Patterson had started so many years ago. Sarah pulled out the first stone and held it up to the light. The students leaned forward, curious and eager, their young faces shining with possibility. "Sometimes," she began, "the bravest thing we can do is ask for help. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is listen when someone asks." A little boy in the front row raised his hand. "Ms. Jones, is it true you used to be homeless?" "Yes," she said simply. And that's part of our first lesson. Because today, we're going to learn about something more important than math or spelling. We're going to learn about how one small act of kindness can change someone's whole world. She looked at Maria, who was clutching her own lucky stone, at Mrs. Chen, who had helped connect all the pieces, and through the classroom window, she caught a final glimpse of Barron walking down the hallway, already on his phone, probably arranging help for another teacher. The seeds that Mrs. Patterson had planted so long ago weren't just blooming, they were spreading, growing into a garden of hope that would keep flowering for years to come. Sarah smiled at her new class and began to tell their story. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of hope and kindness. If this story touched your heart, you can help spread its message by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing how these stories reach people around the world. Before you go, you won't want to miss another amazing story of unexpected kindness. Click the video on your screen now to watch Barron Trump Gives Up First Class, Seat for Veteran. Then the unbelievable happens. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. Remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change someone's entire world. See you in the next video. Stay blessed.